Hey there, focused learners, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a truly fascinating piece of literature that has honestly been sparking debate for over 2.5 centuries. We're talking about Oliver Goldsmith's 1766 novel, The Vicar of Wakefield. We're going to focus intensely on our protagonist, Dr. Primrose, and really unpack the profound trials and the growth he experiences throughout the story. And look, this isn't just some dusty old tale. It actually laid the groundwork for the modern unreliable narrator trope that we see absolutely everywhere today. So let's jump right in and explore a story that blends sentiment, morality, and maybe, just maybe, a very subtle dose of social satire.
This brings us to the ultimate question at the very heart of our explainer today. I want you to imagine something for a second. What happens when a perfectly good man loses literally everything? It's basically the ultimate test of human virtue. You have to wonder, how much tragedy, how much relentless, back-to-back disaster can one man actually endure before his morals finally break? Well, as you'll see, Goldsmith pushes this concept to the absolute limit. But to understand the depths to which our protagonist sinks, we first have to establish his starting point. Let's look at Section 1, A Fall from Grace.
First off, let's define exactly who we're dealing with here. Dr. Charles Primrose is a vicar. He's this generous, optimistic, and prudent village clergyman. Early readers back in the 18th century, they saw him as this unwavering paragon of goodness. His life is totally idyllic. It's cloistered, is defined by deep faith in this incredibly peaceful, unified family with his wife Deborah and their 6 kids. Basically, he is the picture-perfect representation of genteel 18th-century virtue.
But, as you can probably guess, that peace definitely doesn't last. A sudden financial collapse completely shatters their comfortable little world. Dr. Primrose actually loses his entire fortune to a shady merchant who goes bankrupt and just runs off. Suddenly destitute, the family is forced to pack up their entire lives and move to a much more humble, rural setting. Now, initially, Primrose handles this surprisingly well. He accepts his new lot in life, he works as a curate and a farmer, and he really tries to keep his family's pride in check. But unfortunately, this is just the very beginning of his trials.
Because right when you think things can't possibly get any worse for the Primrose family, they absolutely do. Here's Section 2, The Cascading Nightmare. The rapid succession of these disasters is honestly staggering. It's like a horrible set of dominoes. First, we have the loss of their fortune to that swindler. Then, his daughter Olivia is abducted and tricked into a fake marriage by their corrupt landlord, Squire Thornhill. While Primrose is out frantically trying to find her, he falls severely ill. When he finally makes it back, there is a terrible house fire. He heroically charges right into the flames to save his 2 youngest sons, severely burning his own arm in the process. And then, literally the very next day, Squire Thornhill demands unpaid rent, which, of course, Primrose can't pay. So he's arrested and thrown into a debtor's jail.
And yet, the timeline of terror just keeps going, even while he is sitting in a damp prison cell. His eldest son, George, is dragged into the very same prison, totally bloodied and beaten after fighting a duel to defend the family's honor. Then, the vicar learns his other daughter, Sophia, has been suddenly abducted. And finally, the absolute crushing blow. A fellow inmate brings him the news that Olivia has died of a broken heart. I mean, he has hit absolute rock bottom here. Every single pillar of his life has been systematically destroyed.
So, you might be asking, why put this guy through so much suffering? Literary critic Claudia Brodsky really hit the nail on the head when she noted, "To be completely miserable is the goal toward which the vicar strives, since it alone will guarantee the greatest reward in death." This perfectly illustrates the mechanics of the sentimental fiction genre of that era. The protagonist is pushed to the absolute brink, essentially acting as a mouthpiece for extreme endurance, just to test the limits of his religious and moral fortitude against a world that seems fundamentally broken.
But how he reacts to this broken world is what's truly remarkable. Let's examine his extraordinary growth in Section 3, Light in the Dungeon.
When Primrose enters the penal system, he's basically thrown into what political philosopher Thomas Hobbes called the state of nature. Think of this as a dreadful state of mutual fear and distrust, where people are forced to rely entirely on their own brute strength just for self-preservation. The prison is filled with wretches totally divested of moral feeling. It's an environment of total, absolute corruption that directly clashes with Primrose's optimistic, sentimental worldview.
But here is the thing. Primrose doesn't just sit around and wallow. He takes action. Let's walk through the incredible steps he takes down in that dungeon. First, he actually sets out to reform these seemingly irredeemable inmates. He preaches this incredibly powerful sermon on fortitude that literally brings them to tears.
And amazingly, he turns the prison into a productive society. He starts a whole cottage industry where the inmates begin making tobacco stoppers and shoe lasts to earn a living. He essentially becomes a self-appointed legislator, completely transforming this Hobbesian nightmare into a functioning community.
And through this whole harrowing process, his worldview really starts to mature. He begins to critically examine the very society that put him in that cell to begin with. Primrose passionately decries a false social contract that puts these punishing penal laws in the hands of the rich and lands them squarely on the backs of the poor. He argues against capital punishment for minor offenses and points out how the legal system pretty much only serves the wealthy. Even in his absolute darkest misery, he steps up and becomes a profound advocate for justice and equality.
Okay, so how does he ever get out of this mess? That brings us to Section 4, the Sovereign Savior.
The resolution of this story is, well, it's miraculous. Throughout the novel, the family had befriended this poor, kind of eccentric guy named Mr. Burchell. But in the final act, Mr. Burchell reveals his true identity. Plot twist, he is actually the incredibly wealthy and powerful Sir William Thornhill. And like a benevolent god, he swoops in and fixes the whole shebang. He personally rescues Sophia from her abductors. He proves that Olivia's fake marriage to his villainous nephew was actually legally binding all along. He gets Primrose and George out of jail. And finally, the original swindler is caught, restoring the family's lost fortune.
Now, if you're thinking, wow, that sounds just a bit too convenient, you are definitely not alone. Some really legendary authors found this wildly improbable ending to be a major narrative flaw. Henry James famously called the novel the spoiled child of our literature, and George Eliot noted it was told in the most irregular fashion. This hastily resolved magical ending felt completely out of step with the deep, gritty suffering that we just saw in the earlier chapters.
Which brings us to a massive, paradigm-shifting question. We've just watched this supposedly virtuous man suffer terribly, grow, and then be magically rewarded. But let me ask you, was Dr. Primrose actually a good man?
Let's move to our final section and see how this builds into one of the most fascinating twists in modern literary criticism. Section 5. Paragon or hypocrite?
There is this stark, wild contrast in how readers have viewed the vicar over time. For the 18th and 19th centuries, readers basically took the text at face value. Primrose was a noble, unselfish, loving father, an exemplary Christian. Case closed. But the post-1960s view, it completely reframes things. Modern critics began pointing out all these glaring inconsistencies, arguing that he is actually a smug, materialistic, and hypocritical, unreliable narrator.
Let's actually unpack that modern criticism for a second. Does his constant moralizing just mask his own pride, his comical ineptitude at judging character, and his hidden obsession with social status? Critics point out that he is constantly, and I mean constantly, duped by appearances. He judges the wealthy Sir William as a scoundrel when he's dressed as a poor man, yet he totally sucks up to the evil Squire Thornhill just because the guy has money and status. He preaches humility all day long, yet he's fiercely proud and obsesses over making advantageous, high-status marriages for his daughters.
So the absolutely crucial point here is, did Oliver Goldsmith make a mistake, or was he playing a trick on us all along? As critic Ronald Paulson suggests, Primrose is both an ironist and the object of dramatic irony. This suggests that Goldsmith intentionally designed the vicar to be deeply flawed right from the start. By making him entirely blind to his own vanity, the novel transforms from a straightforward sentimental tragedy into an absolute masterpiece of gentle, subversive social satire.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. I want to leave you with this final, lingering thought to chew on. Is Dr. Primrose a saintly survivor of extreme trials, or is he actually an arrogant hypocrite completely blinded by his own vanity? Perhaps the true brilliance of the Vicar of Wakefield is that it allows us to see both at the exact same time. I highly encourage you to go read the book and decide for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me today, Focused Learners. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.